The ranch stretched far across the plains, its fences weathered, its barns sturdy but aged, and its land kissed by the endless sun. To most people in the small town nearby, it was simply the old Carter place, run by a man who spoke little, kept to himself, and came into town only when necessity demanded it. That man was Thomas Carter, a rancher whose silence told more stories than his words ever could. Thomas had once been different. Years back, before grief carved its place into his face, he had been known as a man of warmth, with a laugh that carried across the cattle fields. He had built the ranch with his own two hands, alongside a wife who had been the anchor to his storm. Together they had dreamed of filling the home with children, of making the place more than just a spread of land. It was meant to be a legacy. But fate had been unkind. His wife had fallen ill one harsh winter, and within weeks he had buried her beneath the cottonwood tree behind the house. The laughter left him then, replaced by the steady rhythm of work and the silence of the wide plains. From that day forward, Thomas became known as the rancher who carried on alone. His neighbors admired his grit, though they pitied the emptiness that clung to him. He had no children to help him, no family to lean on, and no desire to remarry despite the whispers of women in town who thought a man like him would not stay unmarried long. But Thomas never looked their way. His heart had been buried with his wife, and though he still rose each morning with the dawn to tend to his cattle and mend his fences, he lived like a man surviving, not one truly living. He was a man of routine. Sunrise saw him saddling his horse, riding out across the pasture to count heads of cattle, to check the water troughs, and to scan the horizon for signs of coyotes or strays. Midday found him working the soil, fixing broken planks, or hauling supplies. Evenings, he sat by the fire with a cup of black coffee, staring at the flames as though searching for answers that never came. The house around him was clean but bare, with no touches of comfort beyond necessity. A photograph of his late wife sat on the mantel, her face the last soft thing in a world that had grown hard. Despite his silence, Thomas was respected. He had the kind of presence that drew both caution and trust. He didn't waste words, but when he spoke, people listened. Some said it was his steady gaze. Others claimed it was the quiet integrity he carried. When disputes rose in town, Thomas was sometimes called to listen, not as a judge, but as a man whose fairness seemed beyond question. Yet for all his respect, there was loneliness that lingered around him. The nights were the worst, when the sound of coyotes in the distance echoed the emptiness of the big ranch house. Sometimes he wondered if he had made a mistake choosing this life. Not the ranching itself, he loved the land, but the solitude. He hadn't planned it this way. He hadn't planned to be left behind. Still, Thomas endured, for enduring was what he knew best. Each day he rose, worked, and rested, believing life had given him all it would. He did not expect surprises anymore. He did not expect joy or family or laughter to return. He had made peace with the silence of his days, unaware that fate was already preparing to break it in the most unexpected way. On the other side of town, a woman named Clara lived in a modest shack that leaned as if the wind itself was too heavy a burden for it to bear. She had once known comfort. Her late husband, Daniel, had been a kind man with big dreams, working the railroads and saving what little he could to someday buy land of his own. But death does not ask for permission. A sudden accident on the line had claimed him, leaving Clara widowed with 2 young daughters and no means to provide beyond what her tired hands could earn. Clara had always been strong-willed, but grief and responsibility pressed hard upon her shoulders. Every morning before dawn she rose quietly, stoking the meager fire while her daughters still slept. She patched torn clothes with worn thread, prepared what little food was left, and set about doing odd jobs for neighbors, washing linens, mending garments, or scrubbing floors in town. The work was relentless, but it was the only way to keep bread on the table. Her daughters, Lily and Anna, were the light in her dim world. Lily, the eldest at just 9 years old, carried the weight of worry far beyond her years. Her small hands often reached for tasks a child shouldn't have to do, fetching water, sweeping the floor, or keeping Anna entertained when their mother was away. Clara sometimes caught her daughter staring with eyes too serious for her age, as though Lily already knew that childhood was a luxury their family could not afford. Anna, only 5, still had the softness of innocence. She laughed easily and clung to her mother's skirts, unaware of the world's cruelties. She asked questions endlessly, about her father, about the stars, about why the bread sometimes tasted stale, or why her shoes pinched her toes. Clara often answered with a forced smile, tucking Anna's hair behind her ear, hiding the truth as best she could. She wanted Anna to hold on to that innocence a little longer, even if Lily had already begun to lose hers. The townsfolk noticed Clara's struggle. Some offered small kindnesses, a basket of eggs left at her door, a bag of flour given at half price, but others whispered cruelly behind her back. A widow with 2 children was often judged unfairly, as though her husband's death had somehow left a stain on her. Some women turned away when she passed, clutching their own husbands tighter, while a few men saw her desperation as an opportunity for unwanted advances. Clara endured it all with quiet dignity, though at night she often cried herself to sleep once the girls were safe in bed. Food was the greatest worry. Some days Clara skipped her own meals so that her daughters would not feel hunger gnawing at their bellies. Lily noticed, of course. She always noticed, but never spoke of it aloud. Instead, she pressed her mother's hand and whispered, "I'm not hungry tonight, Mama. Give it to Anna." Clara's heart ached each time she heard those words, knowing Lily's small sacrifice came from love, not appetite. Despite it all, Clara held to a fragile thread of faith. She believed that if she just endured long enough, something would change. Perhaps she would find steadier work, or the girls would grow strong enough to help more. She prayed each night not for herself, but for her daughters' futures, that they might one day know security, love, and kindness in a world that had shown them too much hardship already. Unbeknownst to her, the answer to those prayers was already stirring. Life, though often cruel, has a way of weaving destinies together in unexpected places. And soon, Clara's quiet struggle would cross paths with the solitude of the rancher, setting into motion a story neither of them could have imagined. The general store in town was always a gathering place. Farmers came for seed, ranchers for tools, housewives for flour and sugar, and children for the rare chance to tug at their mother's skirts until a sweet or 2 was slipped into the purchase. The wooden floors creaked under boots, and the air always carried a mixture of spices, tobacco, and dust. One late afternoon, as storm clouds gathered on the horizon, Thomas Carter rode into town. He tied his horse at the hitching post outside the store, adjusted his hat, and stepped inside. His list was simple: coffee, nails, and salt. His visits were always brief. He disliked small talk and rarely lingered longer than needed. On that same day, Clara had brought her daughters into town. Their cupboard at home was almost bare, and she prayed she might trade or bargain for enough to last another week. The girls clung to her, Anna skipping along happily, unaware of the desperation behind their errand, while Lily held her mother's hand tightly, her eyes scanning the shelves with the calculating gaze of someone far older than her years. Clara's plan was to buy a little flour and perhaps some dried beans, but her money was short. She stood at the counter, quietly negotiating with the storekeeper, when Anna's curiosity pulled her away. The little girl wandered to a shelf stacked with small trinkets, buttons, ribbons, and marbles. She picked up a polished pebble wrapped in twine, the sort of thing a child might treasure as though it were a gemstone. With innocent determination, Anna carried it to the counter and set it down. "Can I trade this for bread?" she asked the storekeeper, holding out the pebble with both hands. The store fell silent. A couple of men leaning against barrels glanced over, their expressions shifting from curiosity to pity. The storekeeper, taken aback, rubbed his beard and looked at Clara, whose face flushed with embarrassment. Lily tugged at her sister's sleeve, whispering harshly, "Put it back, Anna." Clara's voice shook as she gently pulled the pebble from her daughter's hands. "I'm sorry," she murmured, her pride wounded, her heart aching. She started to reach for her coin purse, knowing full well she did not have enough. It was then Thomas Carter, standing a few steps away, saw the exchange. His sharp, quiet eyes lingered on the little girl's hopeful face, then on the weary lines etched into Clara's. Something inside him stirred, a memory of his wife's gentle laugh, of dreams of children who never came. Without a word, he set his items on the counter and reached into his pocket. "Add their supplies to mine," he said simply, his voice steady but low. Clara froze, her hand still gripping her daughter's shoulder. She turned to look at him, meeting his gaze for the first time. There was no pity in his eyes, only a quiet steadiness, as though helping them was not charity, but a matter of course. "I can't accept," she began, her pride bristling even in her need. But Thomas only adjusted his hat, not waiting for her protest. "It's done," he said, and slid a few coins across the counter. The storekeeper nodded, already wrapping up flour, beans, and a small bundle of bread. Anna beamed, hugging her mother's skirts, while Lily studied the rancher with wide, cautious eyes. Clara whispered a thank you, though it caught in her throat. Thomas gave a brief nod, gathered his own supplies, and stepped outside without another word. That evening, as Clara walked home with her daughters, the bag of provisions heavier than she had expected, she couldn't stop thinking about the man in the hat, the rancher who had spoken little, yet done more than words could ever convey, and Thomas, riding back to his lonely ranch, found himself thinking of the widow and her children far longer than he thought he would. In the days that followed the encounter at the general store, Clara carried her bag of provisions home with a mixture of relief and unease. The flour and beans stretched further than she had dared hope. The bread gave her girls a rare taste of fullness, yet her pride ached as if she had bartered away more than coins. She had thanked the rancher, at least she thought she had, but the words had felt too small, like patching a hole in a roof with a single nail. Clara's days returned quickly to their routine. Work did not stop simply because kindness had bought her a moment's rest. Each morning she woke before sunrise, her fingers stiff from the chill, and went about preparing the girls for the day. She washed what little clothing they had, mended torn hems with thread unraveling from old garments, and sent Lily to fetch water from the well while she coaxed Anna to eat. But it was Lily who carried the heaviest burden. At 9 years old, she had become her mother's shadow, quietly watching, quietly helping. She noticed when Clara's hands trembled after scrubbing too long, when her cough rattled in her chest after a day bent over laundry. She noticed, too, how Clara sometimes pushed her own plate away, claiming she was already full. Lily never argued aloud, but she always split her portion, slipping pieces of bread to her mother when she thought she wasn't looking. The little girl bore it all without complaint, but the weight showed in her eyes. Instead of running freely in the dirt roads with the other children, Lily often stayed close to home, sweeping the floor, folding what linens they had, or trying to soothe Anna when she grew restless. Responsibility had aged her. She was still a child, yet she moved like someone who already knew the world was unforgiving. Anna, on the other hand, was too young to understand the strain. She still played, still laughed, still tugged at her mother's skirts when she wanted to be carried. Clara often tried to shield her youngest from the worst of their reality. She'd hum lullabies as she once had when Daniel was alive, and she'd smooth Anna's hair with gentle hands, as though keeping the world's harshness at bay with each stroke. But Clara herself could not escape the gnawing fear. Every cough reminded her how thin her body had become. Every long day left her weaker. She worried what would happen if she fell ill, if her strength gave out before her daughters were old enough to fend for themselves. Sometimes, when the girls were asleep, she sat by the window and wept silently, her tears hidden in the darkness. It was on one such evening that Lily woke and padded quietly to her mother's side. She didn't ask why she was crying. She simply leaned against her, small hand curling into Clara's calloused fingers. "Don't worry, Mama," she whispered. "I'll take care of Anna. I promise." Those words pierced Clara's heart. Her daughter's vow was both tender and tragic, spoken with the certainty of someone who already understood sacrifice. Clara hugged her tightly, wishing she could take away that sense of duty, wishing Lily could be free to dream like other children her age. Still, life pressed on. Clara took more odd jobs, sometimes leaving Lily to watch Anna while she scrubbed floors in town. She endured whispers behind her back, endured hunger, endured exhaustion, because she had no choice. And though she tried not to think of it, she often remembered the silent rancher at the store. The way he had stepped forward without hesitation, the way his eyes had held no pity, only quiet resolve. She didn't know why his small act lingered in her mind. But sometimes, when fear pressed too heavily, she found herself wishing for that same steadiness to hold her family together. Little did she know, that moment in the store had already set her daughter's hearts turning in unexpected directions, especially Lily's, whose sense of responsibility was about to lead her into a fateful decision. The storm rolled in from the west one evening, sudden and fierce, rattling the windows of Clara's little shack. Wind howled through the gaps in the walls, and the roof groaned under the pounding rain. Clara huddled her daughters close, wrapping them in the thin quilts she had patched over the years. The fire sputtered low, almost drowned by the drafts sneaking through every crack. Anna whimpered, burying her face into her mother's side. Clara stroked her hair, whispering comfort she barely believed herself. She could feel her own strength slipping faster these days. Her cough had deepened, and every task left her breathless. Though she tried to hide it, Lily saw the truth. That night, when Anna finally drifted into a fitful sleep, Lily lay awake beside her mother. The storm outside matched the storm in her small heart. She could no longer ignore the questions that haunted her. What will happen if Mama gets worse? What if she can't work anymore? What if Anna and I have no one? She thought of the man at the general store, the rancher who had stepped forward without words, who had paid for their food as though it was the simplest thing in the world. He had looked strong, steady, like someone who could hold up the sky if it threatened to fall. Lily remembered his eyes, the way he had glanced at Anna with a quiet softness before turning away. Something about him made her believe he would not let children go hungry, not if it was in his power to help. And so, the thought formed in her young mind. If Mama could not care for them, perhaps someone else could. She didn't dare tell Clara. It would break her mother's heart. But Lily, small as she was, had already decided she must act. The next morning, after the storm cleared and the sky stretched wide and blue again, Lily slipped away while her mother was hanging laundry to dry. She walked down the muddy road toward the ranch, her shoes soaked, her thin dress clinging to her legs. Fear pounded in her chest, but determination carried her forward. When she reached the ranch, she found Thomas Carter working near the barn, mending a broken gate. He looked up as she approached, his brow furrowing in surprise at the sight of a child alone. "Where's your mama?" he asked, his voice low, calm as always. Lily swallowed hard, her small hands twisting together. "She's at home," she said softly, then hesitated. I came to ask you something." Thomas set down his tools, giving her his full attention. The weight of his gaze felt heavy, but not unkind. Lily's voice trembled as she finally spoke the words that had been pressing against her chest all night. "Can you take her instead of me?" She pointed toward the road, though her little hand shook. "My sister, Anna. She's small, and she still laughs, and she doesn't understand how bad things are. Mama's sick, and I can help Mama, but Anna needs someone strong, someone who can feed her and keep her safe, please." Her voice cracked, and tears spilled down her cheeks, though she tried to wipe them away quickly. "Take Anna, don't take me. Just her." The words hung in the air, heavier than the storm clouds that had passed. Thomas said nothing at first. His throat tightened, his jaw set. He had faced loss, drought, loneliness, but nothing had pierced him like this child's plea. Before him stood a girl far too young to understand sacrifice, yet willing to give away her own childhood, her own security, to save her sister. Her words carried the weight of love and the weight of despair. Thomas's silence was not indifference. It was the battle raging within him, for in that moment the walls he had built around his grief began to crack. He could not choose between one child and another. He could not walk away. And though he had no words yet, Lily's question had already decided his course. The air around the barn seemed to still after Lily's trembling words. Thomas Carter stood rooted in place, his rough hands tightening around the wooden beam he had been repairing only moments before. He had known hardship. He had known loss. But never had he stood face to face with such naked sacrifice from someone so small. The child's voice still echoed in his ears. "Can you take her instead of me?" He looked at her, thin shoulders hunched, mud caked on her shoes, eyes too old for her 9 years. Her face was streaked with tears, but her chin lifted with a courage that made his chest ache. This wasn't a plea born of selfishness. It was love, pure and selfless, the kind that did not think of its own cost. Thomas swallowed hard. His instinct was to speak, to say, "No, child. I could never take one without the other." But the words caught in his throat. His life had been silence for so long that speaking felt foreign. He had buried his wife with silence. He had carried his grief in silence. And now, that silence carried the weight of his decision. He stepped closer, his boots crunching against the gravel. Lily flinched slightly as though expecting him to refuse. Instead, he crouched down so his weathered face was level with hers. His hand, large, calloused from years of rope and reins, lifted slowly before resting gently on her small shoulder. For a long moment, he just looked at her. His eyes, usually guarded, softened. In them, Lily saw no pity, no hesitation. She saw a man wrestling with a tide of emotions too deep to name, but also a steadiness that felt like an anchor against the storms of her life. Thomas didn't answer her question with words. Instead, he shook his head, slowly, firmly, not in refusal of her plea, but in refusal of the choice she thought she had to make. When Lily's lips parted to protest, Thomas reached out and gathered her into his arms. The gesture was awkward at first. He hadn't held a child in years, maybe ever, but the way her small body trembled against him broke something loose inside his chest. She clung to him, startled, as though the burden she carried had suddenly become too heavy to hold. He held her tighter. "You don't have to give her up," he finally whispered, the words rough and low, as though dragged from a place in him that hadn't been used in years. Lily's tears soaked his shirt, her little fists clutching at the fabric. "But Mama's sick," she sobbed, "and Anna doesn't understand, and I don't know what to do." Thomas hushed her, not with shushing sounds, but with the firm, steady presence of someone who had decided. His silence became his answer. He would not choose one child over the other. He would not leave them to face the world alone. When he finally stood, still holding Lily, his gaze drifted toward the road that led back to their shack. His mind worked in quiet resolve. He had not planned for this. He had long ago given up on family, on laughter, on the sound of small feet in his house. But life had set this child before him, and her plea had become a charge he could not ignore. By the time he carried her back down the road, the decision was already made. He would take them, not just Anna, not just Lily, but both girls. And their mother, too. His silence was not an absence of choice, but the weight of a choice too sacred to speak lightly. That night, Clara would open her door to find her eldest daughter cradled in the arms of the rancher. And though she would not yet understand the full meaning of it, his silence had already changed the course of all their lives. When Clara opened the door that evening, the sight before her nearly stole the breath from her chest. There, framed by the last pale light of sunset, stood Thomas Carter, the quiet rancher she scarcely knew, holding Lily in his arms. Her daughter's face was tear-stained, her little hands clinging to his shirt as though she had found a lifeline she could not let go of. For a moment, Clara could not move. Fear struck her first. Fear that Lily had done something foolish. Fear that she had burdened this man with their troubles. "Lily!" she gasped, rushing forward, her hands trembling as she reached for her daughter. "What happened? What were you thinking, running off like that?" But Lily only buried her face deeper into Thomas's chest, unable to answer. Clara's heart twisted with confusion. She looked up at the rancher, her eyes wide, demanding an explanation. Thomas shifted slightly, lowering Lily to the ground, though the girl still held on to his hand as if afraid he might vanish. His expression was unreadable, but there was a gravity to it that made Clara's breath falter. She came to me, he said at last, his voice low, steady. Said you were sick. Asked me to take her sister instead of her. Clara's knees nearly gave out. She clutched the doorframe, her eyes brimming with tears. Oh, dear Lord, she whispered, pressing a hand to her mouth. The thought of Lily making such a plea, of her daughter believing she had to choose sacrifice so young, was more than her heart could bear. I told her no, Thomas continued, his gaze holding Clara's. I won't take one child over the other. I won't leave you to fight this alone. Clara shook her head, overwhelmed. You don't understand. I can't ask this of you. We're not your responsibility. You didn't ask, Thomas said firmly, his silence breaking only when it mattered most. But she did, and I gave her my answer. His words were not loud, yet they carried the weight of a vow. Clara looked at him, seeing for the first time not just the stoic rancher who kept to himself, but a man marked by grief, now moved by the innocence of a child's plea. Something unspoken passed between them, an understanding that his decision was not charity nor pity, but an act of love born from quiet conviction. Clara knelt, pulling Lily into her arms. The girl sobbed against her, whispering apologies. I just wanted Anna to be safe, Mama. I didn't know what else to do. Oh, my brave girl, Clara murmured, kissing her forehead, her tears mingling with her daughter's. You should never have to make choices like that. She glanced at Thomas again, her voice breaking. And you, why would you do this? For us? Thomas's jaw tightened. He looked away for a moment toward the darkening horizon. Then he turned back, his eyes steady. Because no child should ever have to beg for a family, and no mother should carry the weight alone. There was no poetry in his tone, no flourish, just truth. And it was enough. That night, Thomas led Clara and her daughters back to his ranch. The house that had stood silent for years now echoed with the sound of small footsteps, the rustle of quilts being laid out, and the quiet sighs of children settling into beds they did not have to fear losing. For the first time in so long, Thomas sat by the fire and did not feel the gnawing emptiness of solitude. He felt the weight of change pressing in on him. Yes, but it was the kind of weight that steadied a man, like reins in his hands or the roots of a tree anchoring deep in the earth. His silence that night was not emptiness. It was a promise. A vow spoken without words. They were his now, all of them, and he would never let them go. The Carter Ranch had stood in silence for so many years that even the walls seemed to have grown accustomed to it. Dust settled thick in corners. The echoes of hoofbeats outside were never followed by laughter within, and the big oak table in the kitchen had long since gone unused except for Thomas's solitary meals. But everything changed the morning Clara and her daughters woke under its roof. The first rays of sunlight poured through the windows, not onto a quiet, empty room, but onto the soft rustle of children stirring beneath quilts. Anna, with her hair tangled and her small hands clutching a blanket too big for her, blinked sleepily at her new surroundings. Mama, she whispered, this bed is softer than ours. Clara smiled faintly, though her heart was still heavy with uncertainty. She had spent the night half awake, torn between gratitude and fear. Gratitude for the shelter, for Thomas's act of mercy. Fear for what it might mean. Could she trust this man fully? Could she allow her daughters to grow attached when life had taught her again and again that security was fragile? Her worries, however, were briefly interrupted by Lily, already up and helping Thomas in the kitchen. Clara could hear the muffled sounds of movement, the scrape of chairs, the clink of a kettle being set down. When she rose and peeked in, her breath caught at the sight. There was Lily, standing on tiptoe to reach the counter, stirring a pot with both hands while Thomas stood beside her, quietly guiding her motions. He didn't speak much, just a word here and there, but his patience was unmistakable. Lily's face lit with a rare smile, pride gleaming in her eyes, as if she had been entrusted with something important. Anna scampered in soon after, tugging at Thomas's sleeve with boundless curiosity. Do the cows have names? Can I see them? She asked eagerly. Thomas knelt down, his large frame folding in on itself so he could look her in the eye. Some do, he replied in his rough voice. "I'll show you after breakfast." Clara, standing in the doorway, felt her throat tighten. It was such a simple scene. Children in a kitchen, a man tending to them as if it were natural. Yet for her it was almost overwhelming. For so long she had carried everything alone. Now, here was someone else, someone steady, someone strong, who had stepped into their lives without hesitation. The day unfolded differently than any Clara could remember. After breakfast, Thomas led them out to the barn. Anna squealed with delight at the sight of the horses, clapping her hands when one nuzzled her palm. Lily followed more cautiously, but Thomas placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, pointing out how to hold the reins, how to approach without fear. His quiet teaching carried more weight than pages of instruction. Clara found herself helping too, gathering eggs from the chicken coop, hanging laundry in the fresh breeze, even standing alongside Thomas as he showed her where he kept supplies. For the first time in months, she felt the faint stirrings of belonging, though she dared not say it aloud. When evening came, the ranch no longer felt like a place of emptiness. The kitchen filled with the aroma of stew, children's laughter spilled through the halls, and even the long, quiet dining table seemed less hollow with the clatter of spoons and the murmur of voices. Thomas sat at the head, listening more than speaking, but his eyes softened each time they landed on the girls, or on Clara, when she thought he wasn't looking, that night. As Clara tucked Anna into bed and kissed Lily's forehead, she lingered at the doorway of their room. The sound of their soft breathing filled her with relief. For the first time since Daniel's death, she didn't feel as though the ground beneath her feet might collapse at any moment. And in the next room, Thomas sat by the fire, staring at the flames the way he always did. But this time, the silence wasn't heavy. It wasn't loneliness. It was the kind of silence that comes when a house has finally begun to feel like a home again. The days turned into weeks, and the Carter Ranch slowly shed its cloak of silence. Where once only the wind and cattle broke the stillness, now the air rang with children's laughter, Clara's soft voice, and the rhythmic hum of shared chores. Yet beneath the growing warmth of this new life, each person carried their own wounds, some visible, others buried deep. For Anna, the ranch was a place of discovery. She had been too young to fully understand the weight of their hardships, but she had carried fear in her small body, fear of losing her mother, fear of the long nights when there wasn't enough to eat, fear of never belonging. On the ranch, she began to blossom. Each day she followed Thomas like a shadow, asking endless questions. She learned how to scatter feed for the chickens, how to brush the horses' coats, how to listen to the land's quiet rhythms. With every answer Thomas gave, her fear lessened. She began to laugh freely, to run without glancing over her shoulder, to sleep soundly without clinging to Clara. Lily's healing was slower. The older child carried memories that Anna had been spared. She remembered their father, his warm laugh, his protective arms, the way he had once lifted her high into the air. His absence weighed on her like a stone, and no matter how kind Thomas was, she struggled with guilt. To accept his presence felt like betraying her father's memory. So she kept her distance at first, helping when asked but rarely seeking him out. Thomas, for his part, noticed. He did not press her, nor did he demand her affection. Instead, he gave her space while quietly showing her that he was steady, dependable, and safe. When she lingered near the corral, he wordlessly offered her a rope, teaching her to tie knots without fanfare. When she sat silently at supper, he filled her plate without asking. And when she finally broke down one evening, whispering to Clara that she didn't want to forget her papa, Thomas overheard from the next room. He didn't intrude. Instead, the next morning, he led Lily to the cottonwood tree behind the house where his wife lay buried. "This is where I remember her," he said quietly. "It doesn't go away, the missing, but it doesn't mean there's no room for more." He didn't force a lesson. He simply spoke the truth of his own heart, and in doing so gave Lily permission to grieve without guilt. For the first time, she looked at him not as a stranger filling a void, but as someone who understood loss as deeply as she did. Clara's healing was perhaps the hardest of all. Every kindness Thomas offered made her heart ache with both gratitude and fear. She had lived too long expecting abandonment, too long building walls around her heart to keep herself and her daughters safe. To let those walls down felt dangerous, yet the evidence of Thomas's goodness was undeniable. He had taken them in without question, asked for nothing in return, and carried burdens he didn't have to shoulder. One evening, after the girls had gone to bed, Clara found herself sitting by the fire across from him. The quiet between them was different now, less guarded, more searching. She spoke softly, her hands twisting in her lap. "You didn't have to do all this for us. Most men wouldn't have." Thomas looked at her, his face shadowed by the firelight. "Maybe not, but I've lived alone long enough to know when the good Lord sets something in front of me. Feels to me like this ranch wasn't meant to stay empty forever." Tears stung Clara's eyes, though she quickly blinked them away. In that moment, something shifted, not just in her, but between them. The unspoken wounds they both carried, though different in shape and size, began to knit together under the fragile thread of shared hope. Healing, Clara realized, didn't come in grand gestures. It came in mornings where Anna's giggles rang across the pasture, in evenings where Lily allowed herself to smile again, in moments by the fire when Thomas's quiet presence steadied her heart. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe, not in perfection, but in possibility. And that, she knew, was the first true step toward healing. Autumn painted the Carter Ranch in shades of gold and rust. The air carried the crisp bite of change, and the fields shimmered under the fading warmth of the sun. For Thomas, Clara, and the girls, the season seemed to mirror the quiet transformation that had taken place within them. What had once been a house of silence was now a home filled with laughter, work, and the fragile but growing bonds of love. One evening, as the last light dipped behind the hills, Thomas finished closing the barn doors and turned toward the house. He saw Clara standing on the porch, her shawl pulled tightly around her shoulders, watching the children chase each other through the yard. Anna squealed with joy as Lily pretended to catch her, and for a moment the scene was so ordinary, so simple, it brought an ache to Thomas's chest. He realized that somewhere along the way, these girls had become as much a part of his life as the ranch itself. Later that night, after the girls had gone to bed, Clara lingered by the fire while Thomas stacked wood nearby. She seemed restless, her eyes following the flames but not really seeing them. Finally she spoke, her voice trembling just slightly. "Thomas," she began, "I've been thinking about what comes next." He set the last log in place, brushing the dust from his hands before meeting her gaze. "What do you mean?" Clara hesitated. "You've given us shelter, food, safety. More than I ever dreamed of after everything. But I can't keep letting the girls wonder if this is temporary. They deserve to know if this is truly their home, or just a kindness that might end one day." Her words carried the weight of all the fears she had tried to hide. Thomas stepped closer, his face softened by the flickering firelight. He spoke slowly, each word measured but sure. "They already have a home, Clara. This ranch. With me." Her breath caught. "But why? You owe us nothing. Most men would have sent us away." Thomas's gaze dropped briefly to the fire, then back to her. "When Anna asked me that night if I could take you instead of her, she didn't know what she was really asking. But I did. She wasn't asking for food or a roof. She was asking if someone could love her mama enough to stay, to choose her family as his own. And in that moment, Clara, I knew my answer." Clara's eyes filled with tears she couldn't hold back. "You would take us all, truly?" Thomas reached for her hand, rough and calloused, yet steady. "I already have. From the moment you walked onto this ranch, it stopped being just mine, you and the girls. You're the reason this place feels alive again. I don't want to send you away. I want to build a life with you. With them." Clara's heart swelled, the years of fear and uncertainty breaking like a dam inside her. She squeezed his hand, her tears slipping freely now, not from sorrow, but from relief, from hope, from love she had long believed lost. The following morning, as the sun rose over the fields, Thomas saddled his horse with Anna at his side, while Lily gathered eggs with Clara. The ranch was alive with movement, voices, and purpose. For the first time, it didn't feel like a solitary man's burden. It felt like a family's home. That night, as Clara tucked the girls into bed, Anna whispered, "Mama, does this mean we get to stay here forever?" Clara kissed her daughter's forehead, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, sweetheart. Forever." In the next room, Thomas sat by the fire, listening to the sounds of laughter and the settling of a home filled with love. For years, he had lived only with silence and loss. But now, through one small child's question and the choice that followed, he had found not just companionship, but family. And in that simple, steadfast act of love, a lonely rancher, a weary widow, and two little girls discovered that broken lives could be pieced together, not by chance, but by the courage to open their hearts again.